Tonight, I'll tell you about the darkest minds in human history. They say evil wears no face, yet on a humid summer night in Los Angeles, that face, framed by wild hair and haunted eyes, slipped silently through an unlocked door, leaving nothing but terror in its wake. Richard Ramirez was born under the weight of an omen. On February 29, 1960, a leap day, he entered the world in El Paso, Texas, a child of unusual timing, destined to live by his own unnatural calendar. His early years were steeped in violence, a household rattled by his father's fury, a mother resigned to the rage that occasionally spilled like hot blood across the walls. But the true crucible of his malice began with an uncle's return from Vietnam, haunted by nightmares of death, who once showed young Richard the bloody wreckage of human flesh torn apart by war. Those images settled in his mind like seeds in black soil, sprouting fantasies of power and pain. Even as a boy, he would sit for hours, sketching gruesome scenes, twisted limbs, skulls cracked like ripe melons, finding in those drawings a thrill no playground bully could ever offer. By his late teens, Ramirez had ridden freight trains across the Southwest, picking up the rhythms of the road and the aroma of fear. He learned to move like a shadow, slipping into strangers' homes while they slept, drawn not by necessity, but by a hunger he could barely name. The first time he brought violence home, it was almost an afterthought, an experiment in power. An experiment in power. He entered a sleepy ranch house one night, saw a young woman's slippers by the bed, and felt a spark ignite beneath his flesh. The next morning, the rancher's wife woke in a pool of her own blood, her throat and an open wound painted red across the white pillow. No motive, no ransom, just brutality, and Ramirez felt alive. Over the following months, he honed his craft with methodical precision. He studied the Los Angeles Times for patterns, neighborhoods where windows were often left ajar, homes with only one exit, doors secured by failing lock. He carried nail clippers to remove his footprints and gloves to keep his palms clean. He adorned his dark denim jacket with satanic symbols scrawled in shoe polish, a signature for a killer who craved infamy as much as he craved fear. With each murder, he grew bolder. He would enter an elderly woman's bungalow, the hush of her snoring a lullaby for his predatory steps, then hurl her to the floor. His knee snapped her spine like a twig. His boots crushed bone until the sound of cracking seemed to pulse through his veins like a twisted lullaby. When he left, he'd scrawl 666 on the wall, a calling card that announced not just a crime, but a creed. His victims were strangers who felt safe behind closed doors. He struck in playground houses and suburban villas alike, in cheap motels and rented apartments. Each attack as unpredictable as lightning striking without warning. In one house, a young man sat up in bed to see Ramirez's silhouette against the doorway, a knife in hand that glinted like moonlight on ice. The man's last vision was Ramirez's crazed grin as he whispered, "Come with me to the devil's playground," before plunging steel into flesh. In another, a mother of three found herself pinned beneath his weight, his laughter echoing as he carved her arm with a switchblade until the skin unraveled like ribbon. She survived to tell the tale, but Ramirez did not linger. He slipped away into darkness, leaving behind a body broken, a mind shattered, and a community that trembled with dread. Newspapers dubbed him the Night Stalker, though he seldom preferred that title. He'd spray paint pentagrams in his victims' homes, summon police with cryptic phone calls, and claim divine sanction for his act. A Satanist by his own account, he believed he was chosen, an instrument of chaos ordained by infernal forces. In interviews later, he boasted of hearing voices that guided his hand, of feeling pleasure as blood pumped warm between his fingers. His eyes, black as a scorched night, glittered at the thought of another kill, another dark ritual fulfilled. The police hunted him across freeways, lit by flickering neon, tracking his crimes like they were the steps of a dance no mortal should master. They assembled forensic units to compare footprints, blood spatter patterns, fibers from his jacket, each fragment a puzzle piece in a monstrous jigsaw. Yet Ramirez slipped through their grasp again and again, a will-o'-the-wisp of gore and shadow. He used stolen credit cards, left behind receipts stained with fear, and sometimes simply vanished into the city's endless sprawl. He seemed to vanish into the very air, as if he had never existed. But the truly chilling truth of his spree lies not only in his violence, but in his uncanny ability to toy with his chasers. He would send police cryptic letters, mocking taunts, scrawled on motel stationery, celebrating each killing like a composer boasting of a perfected symphony. He mailed Polaroid snapshots of his victims, their eyes wide with uncomprehending terror, each image a silent scream, preserved in high gloss emulsion. He watched the news coverage in cheap hotel rooms, delighted as anchors trembled when someone mentioned his name. In those moments, he was king of a crumbling kingdom of fear, reveling in the knowledge that he alone moved invisibly through the night. Communities fortified their homes, bars on windows, deadbolts on doors, prayer circles in living rooms. Yet, Ramirez found new ways in, through bathroom windows, basement crawl spaces, even dog-eat doors wide enough for his lean frame. He carried a rucksack filled with tools of his trade, knives of various lengths, rope for binding, a small hammer for fluid application of force, and a Bible he never opened. Bloodied gloves he discarded in alleys, shoes with soles worn smooth he left in trash bins. Each sacrifice to the dark god he believed guided him. As the summers passed, the number of his victims climbed into the dozen. Families moved away, leaving empty houses for Ramirez to haunt. Police officers slept with guns under their pillows. He became an urban legend, a nightmare conjured in every shadow, every creaking floorboard. And yet, amid the carnage, there were glimmers of survival. A young girl hidden beneath her bed as he rifled through her parents' belongings. A man who played dead until Ramirez's breathing slowed and he drifted away, believing his prey was lifeless. Those survivors would later describe his voice as calm, almost soothing. When he spoke, a hushed whisper that made the darkness feel alive. Finally, on an ordinary afternoon in August, Ramirez's luck ran out. He boarded a crowded subway car in East Los Angeles, his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses despite the dim light. A man recognized him from a wanted poster, the Night Stalker label barely concealing the horror beneath. Word stole through the train like a contagion. The killer was here. The man raised an alarm, and passengers, driven by outrage, tackled Ramirez to the floor, delivering blows fueled by every nightmare he had visited upon their sit. They held him until the police arrived bloody and stunned, eyes wide with disbelief that myth could be caught in handcuffs. At his trial, Ramirez seemed more specter than man. His gaunt frame shuffled into the courtroom, his blank stare fixed on an unknown horizon. He refused to plead for mercy, instead offering a twisted sermon about the devil's will, smiling when victims' families wept. Jurors recoiled as evidence was displayed. Photographs of eviscerated bodies, sketches he had drawn of limbs severed and reassembled, pages of his diary filled with exhortations to sacrifice and serve the Prince of Darkness. The death sentence was inevitable, yet even as they pronounced judgment, Ramirez seemed to relish his place in history, as if the ultimate punishment would only cement his legacy. In death row's dank confines, he lingered for years, a living ghost awaiting his final passage. He reportedly slept little, haunted by dreams of his own annihilation. When the lethal injection finally came, he stared at the ceiling, silent as the grave he had dug for so many. His last words were undecipherable whispers, a final prayer to the darkness that had birthed him. And then he was gone, leaving behind questions no forensic report could answer. What force drove him deeper into violence? How could one man inflict such calculated horror without a flicker of remorse? Yet the city he terrorized still trembles on stormy nights, when thunder rattles window panes and the wind howls like a chorus of the damned. Those who survived his onslaught carry memories as vivid as scar tissue, images of broken bodies, the copper tang of blood on skin, the hiss of breath escaping dying love. And in the dark corners of our minds, we wonder how far the human soul can fall before it ceases to exist entirely. So let the rain's soft applause lull you as you drift toward sleep. Remember the terror Ramirez wrought and the fragile line between predator and prey. For even as you close your eyes, his story remains, a cautionary whisper that evil may walk beside you, silent as the night itself. And as the shadows deepen, know that another mind darker still waits for its turn to be heard. And as one shadow slips into memory, another quietly takes its place, weaving a tale so ordinary on the surface that no one could imagine the storm of cruelty flickering beneath. He wore a neatly pressed shirt and a warm smile. He greeted neighbors at church on Sunday mornings, kept meticulous household chores, and tucked his 2 children into bed each night with a story and a kiss. By day, Dennis Rader was a dutiful Boy Scout leader, a dutiful husband, a dutiful employee at the county courthouse. Everyday roles polished to a high shine. Yet in the secret hours before dawn, he shed those skins like a snake and dressed in darkness, stalking the streets of Wichita, Kansas, driven by a compulsion he could not, or would not, resist. Born on March 9, 1945, in the quiet Midwest, Dennis' earliest memories were unremarkable. Backyard barbecues, a father proud of his engineering work, a mother who fussed over his buttoned shirts. But beneath the veneer of normalcy lay an obsession with control. As a boy, he delighted in tying up neighborhood friends with scraps of rope, watching them struggle before freeing them with a flourish. Their laughter, tinged with relief and a faint hint of terror, sent a thrill coursing through him, an affirmation of power he could wield with nothing more than twine and a practiced knot. Adolescence did nothing to soothe that hunger. He read anatomy textbooks with hidden fascination, pausing over diagrams of ligaments and nerves, memorizing how the human body responded when pressure was applied in precise ways. At night, he scribbled fantasies in a hidden journal, plans of binding, gagging, and orchestrating scenes of exquisite helplessness. He imagined the moment of terror in his victim's eyes, the symphony of muffled cries, and the slow pulse of fear. Those pages, stained with sweat and trembling ink, would one day become a testament to his methodical mind. In 1974, the first real act of violence bloomed like a poisoned flower. A young woman walking home from a friend's house was discovered bound and strangled, her body arranged neatly, as if placed on an altar of depravity. The term BTK appeared in small letters scrawled on the wall beside her corpse. Bind, torture, kill. Law enforcement was baffled. There were no eyewitnesses, no fingerprints, no clear motive, only the chilling signature of a predator marking his territory. Over the next 2 decades, Dennis Rader performed his dark ritual 10 more times. He planned meticulously, casing houses from the shadows, learning the comings and goings of his victims' families, testing doors and windows for weakness. Once inside, he would pad silently across carpeted floors, relying on darkness and the hush of sleeping suburbs. He donned gloves, rubber straps, even homemade blindfolds, ensuring that every sense, sight, sound, smell, was stripped from those he captured. He reveled in the power of anticipation. Before he approached his prey, he often tethered them by ankles or wrists to stationary fixtures, bathtubs, bed springs, stair railings, watching as panic spread through their limbs. The fear in their eyes fed him. It was as vital as blood, and when the moment came, he choked them until their struggles slackened, measuring the precise pressure required to snuff out life without mercy or hesitate. What allowed him to continue for so long was the mask of normalcy he wore so effortlessly. He volunteered at church bake sales, coached Little League, attended PTA meetings. Every gesture of care, another brick in the wall that concealed his true nature. Neighbors waved as he drove his station wagon down tree-lined streets. Friends admired his attentiveness to his children's school projects. No one suspected that the quiet man who mowed his lawn every Saturday was the same man who had bound a teenager in her own bedroom and left her to die. In letters he mailed to police and newspapers, Rader taunted investigators, detailing every knot he tied, every switchblade he pressed into trembling flesh. He demanded they call him BTK, as if he were a composer proud of his symphony of anguish. Each letter grew more audacious, filled with cryptic hints about the location of his next victim, promises of a grand finale. Investigators scrambled, fearing each new communication would herald another nightmare. And all the while, Dennis wrote from the safety of his suburban home, his children playing at his feet, oblivious to the horror their father orchestrated after bedtime. The psychological depth of his crimes lies not only in their brutality, but in the cold precision with which he approached them. He studied the human body like a surgeon, calculated the angles of ligatures to maximize pain, timed the beats of a heart beneath a strangler's hands. He kept scrapbooks of newspaper clippings, each account of murder a trophy more prized than the last. He dissected the words of detectives in news reports, adjusting his methods to stay one step ahead. Victims ranged from teachers grading papers to a young mother kneeling beside her child's bed. One woman woke to find her hands bound to the headboard, her breath constricted by a cloth gag, as Rader traced the shape of her face by moonlight before tightening the straps that would steal her life. Another sat frozen in the doorway of her garage, a flashlight clutched in one hand, her husband's call of "Who's there?" swallowed by the rasp of Rader's cruel whisper. "It's the devil, and I've come to play." The city grew anxious, dusk settling like a shroud over every quiet neighborhood. Families piled heavy locks on doors, installed security alarms, and hurled glances over their shoulders at every creak in the walls. Rader watched the fear he inspired, writing in his journal of the collective panic spreading through Wichita. "My favorite part," he called. Even when investigators circulated sketches based on eyewitness fragments, Rader adapted, altering his attire, changing his vehicle, communicating less frequently in writing. In 2004, a crucial mistake unraveled decades of secrecy. He sent a floppy disk to police deliberately, eager for recognition. Investigators traced the disk's metadata to a church where a Bill Thomas had last used it, the very alias Rader had recycled from his Boy Scout days. That digital footprint, masked by layers of false identities, finally cracked open. In a dramatic raid, officers found him in the basement of his home, standing amid files of letters, newspaper clippings, and a collection of padlocks he once used on his victims' wrists. When they read him his rights, his lip curled into a faint smile, as though congratulating them on a game at which he'd let them finally win. At trial, his facade shattered in a courtroom filled with survivors and grieving families. He calmly described his methods, his voice steady as he recounted the knots that bound his victims, the exact pressure required to render them unconscious before death. Jurors sat horrified as he delved into the cold mechanics of his atrocities, dissecting each step as if lecturing a class rather than confessing to unspeakable cruelty. When the verdict was handed down, 10 consecutive life sentences without parole, he listened with polite detachment, as though he were hearing of someone else's fate. Yet even from prison, Rader's mind refused to atrophy. He wrote letters that continued to taunt the city. Admitted, he longed for the days when he held that intoxicating control. Psychiatrists who interviewed him described a man with no remorse, who viewed empathy as a weakness, and whose greatest regret was simply getting caught. He remained in darkness, his life behind steel bars, a pale echo of the nights he once roamed freely, searching for the next soul to dominate. Now, when the rain taps slowly on a window pane, and the wind sighs through the eaves, some say you can almost hear the faint click of handcuffs and the rustle of a rope being coiled. You might glimpse a flash of that tidy station wagon slipping between streetlights, driven by a man whose love for his family was matched only by his thirst for terror. And if you listen closely to the hush that fills your room, you'll know why Dennis Rader remained at large for so many years, because the truest monsters are those who look just like us, who walk beside us in broad daylight, and who whisper sweet assurances before dragging us into their private hell. And beyond that next stormy horizon, another chapter of horror awaits, carried on the black wings of history, ready to seep into your dreams. The rain has barely eased, And somewhere in the mist-shrouded foothills of the Andes, a different evil wakes, stirring in the damp earth like a buried poison. His name is Pedro Alonso Lopez, though few have dared speak it aloud, and fewer still have lived to curse his memory. Tonight, I'll slide open a door into his world, a place where innocence was prey, and the mountains themselves seemed to conspire in silence. Born in a ramshackle hut on October 8, 1948, on the ragged border between Colombia and Ecuador, young Pedro's first cries were lost in the sigh of wind through rusted tin. His mother, desperate and driven to prostitution, sold her body in nearby villages. His father, a man of few words and many bruises, took his rage out on whatever shook beneath his fist. By the time Pedro learned to walk, his small feet had already trod across shattered glass and spilled liquor. Hunger was constant, love a myth whispered by other children. It was here, amid the stink of poverty and the stink of men's sweat, that something dark took root in his soul. At 8, he watched his mother's clients slip her name from their lips like a curse, and he learned that desire could be weaponized. At 10, he discovered the thrill of power when he cornered a younger boy in an alley, pressing his body against broken bricks until the child's breath rattled like dry leaves. The moment the boy's eyes widened in terror, Pedro felt a surge of something intoxicating, control, maybe, or the faintest hum of divinity. He backed away, leaving the boy gasping on the dirt, and realized that fear could be drawn from another's veins as easily as blood. By his early teens, Pedro drifted like a ghost, hopping freight trains and slipping into villages under cover of dusk. He carried nothing but a tattered blanket, a length of rope, and that seed of hunger sprouting in his chest. He targeted farmhouses where children slept on straw mats, where mothers left their girls to play in the yard. With the quiet patience of a predator, he would pause at the fence, listen to giggles drifting like wind chimes, then climb over and beckon with a crooked smile. Candy, promises of a better life, a soda from the corner store. Such small wonders to a child raised on starvation. And the children would follow, their footsteps soft as snow, their eyes bright with trust. In a clearing bordered by sugarcane fields, he would tie a pale ribbon around a girl's wrist, a makeshift bracelet he called the first gift. Then he'd bind her ankles, his thumbs pressing into her tender flesh, teaching her that silk ribbon could cut like glass. He whispered kindly, "Don't be afraid," even as he pressed his hand gently over her mouth, tasting her warm breath like honey. The rope snugged tighter with each knot, each loop, and the forest swallowed her pleas as though it had been waiting ons to hear them. When her struggles stilled, he would stare at her like an artist admiring his work, tracing the curve of her cheek with a finger dipped in blood. Each drop, he told himself, was a note in a symphony he alone could compose. Was a note in a symphony he alone could compose. Rumors spread of dozens of missing girls, farm children who never returned from the riverbank, schoolgirls who vanished on errands for their mothers, thieves who raided remote huts only to find empty bedrooms. Police in Ecuador and Colombia traded drones and wore down shoe leather in fruitless searches. But Lopez slipped between jurisdictions like a phantom. He learned which officers took bribes and which dug too deep, and he adjusted his routes accordingly. He struck at dusk, when the Andes cast long shadows that swallowed boot prints. He covered tracks with branches, spilled river water over mud, and left behind shells of discarded sandals in neighboring provinces. When one region grew suspicious, he moved into the next, across borders, across mountains. No wall of mountains, no tangle of jungle could hold back his thirst. In small towns, mothers lit candles at roadside shrines, praying for their daughter's safe return. The flickering flames cast ghostly shapes on adobe walls, but the prayers were powerless. Lopez saw their fate as another form of denial, hope that blinded them to the truth. If they looked at him too closely, if they recognized the shadow under his eyes, they would only avert their gaze, unwilling to see the monster in their midst. And so he persisted, each new victim swelling his count, his confidence mounting like a cresting wave ready to break. By 1978, whispers of his cruelty had reached police chiefs in Lima and Bogota, who circulated grainy composite sketches. Yet even these images failed to terrify Lopez. He studied them, noted the shape of his jaw in pixelated form, and shaved his beard finer, clipped his hair shorter. He changed his gait, learning to limp when he wanted to feign injury, then springing with feral speed once someone inched closer. He wore rubber boots with fresh soles, sometimes swapped them for sandals picked up on market days. With every new disguise, he buried his past crimes deeper beneath a cloak of normality. But it was in Ecuador that his spree would finally crack. In September 1980, a school teacher's daughter failed to return home from classes on the outskirts of Tulcan. Her disappearance might have been one of many lost amid the stew of rural tragedies, until an old man found her charred remains in a dirt bunker, the rope still coiled around her wrist. He alerted authorities, who scoured the bunker's perimeter and found a scrap of Lopez's jacket entangled in barbed wire. That fragment, stained with sweat and ash, was enough to spark an international manhunt. They traced Lopez to a hovel beneath a sagging banana tree, where he sat smoking a hand-rolled cigarette, staring at nothing. When officers crept in, he offered no resistance, only tilted his head and sighed as though awakened from a long dream. In his pockets, they found notebooks packed with names, ages, and inspirational doodles framed by hearts and skulls. He had recorded each date and place of a killing, his own shorthand for Dia de Regalo or Day of Gift, as though his victims had been presents wrapped neatly for him to open at leisure. At interrogation, Lopez confessed freely, his voice calm and almost courteous. He spoke of the delicate beauty of the girls, of wanting to preserve them forever, and of the lessons he taught them in those isolated clearings. He indicated bodies buried in ravines, in pigsties, under rotting piles of coffee husks, methods he called practical to avoid animals scattering remains. No remorse, no shudder, only a polite nod when told that mothers had cried for days without sleep. They will forget in time, he murmured. The land will take back these souls. And, as though offering a gift, he revealed over 300 names. The trial gripped the continent like a fever. Photographs of charred limbs and torn clothing splashed across newspapers. Each image was a dagger in the hearts of families who read them. Lopez sat impassive, a slight, wizened man with pinched lips, his eyes glimmering with something halfway between boredom and pride. He denied none of it. He admitted it all, as though recounting a routine diary entry. Jurors were sickened, tears streaming as they heard testimony from children who had escaped him, girls who hid in stables, who feigned death until they bled onto their skirts in exhaustion. Their voices, trembling in court, echoed beneath towering pillars of justice that felt powerless to swallow the stain of such evil. Sentenced in 1980 to life in an Ecuadorian prison, Lopez spent years in near isolation, confined to a cell where the only window was a grate through which vultures perched at dawn. Guards reported him silent, scribbling in blank notebooks. They found drawings of girls smiling in school uniforms, each face ringed by a halo of rope. He referred to them as "my angels," a phrase that slithered through prison corridors long after the gates clanged shut. Yet in 1994, amid pressure to reduce overcrowding, Lopez was declared cured by a hastily convened panel of psychiatrists and released, an act of mercy that felt like a dagger to every grieving mother. He walked out into the rain, shoulders straight, head held high, as though he had simply served time for a bad habit. His release went almost unnoticed in remote towns, and when the penny dropped in urban centers, it was too late. Lopez had vanished again, swallowed by the same mist that once guided him through the mountains. To this day, no one knows where he roams. Some claim he slipped into the Amazon, living among tribes who never heard his name. Others whisper that he settled in a quiet village on the Andean plateau, working as a laborer by day and watching schoolyards by night. Every so often, a rumor surfaces. A child disappears from a roadside market, or a traveler reports seeing a pale man standing at dawn, black eyes scanning the horizon. But the police seldom pursue such leads. The world has learned to compartmentalize horrors that seem too vast to grasp. They live on in nightmares, in the hush before dawn. And so, the mountains hold their breath, cradling secrets in their folk. The wind whistles through cloud-choked passes, carrying the echo of a child's laughter, and a man's low whisper, "The gift is complete." In the hush that follows, you might find yourself gripping your blanket tighter, imagining slender fingers at your wrist, threads coiling until you cannot move. And as you drift toward the fragile veil of sleep, remember the faces that Pedro Lopez claimed, the numbers carved into his mind like tally marks on a prison wall, and the unholy ease with which he slipped from one nation to the next, leaving sorrow in his wake. But the night is young, and our journey is not yet complete. Ahead lie tales of blood-spattered privilege and hidden chambers of torture, stories that will trail their darkness across your dreams and refuse to let you go. And so, in a crumbling castle on the windswept plains of 16th century Hungary, a new darkness stirred, one born not of poverty or anger, but of privilege twisted into obsession. Elizabeth Bathory was heiress to vast estates, a woman cloaked in velvet and lace, with skin as pale as moonlight and hair like spun gold. Yet behind her glittering jewels and courteous smile lay a craving more monstrous than any bandit's hunger for coin, a desire to steal youth itself, to trap fleeting beauty in vials of blood that glimmered like rubies against her alabaster walls. She was born in August of 1560, the daughter of a family whose name alone commanded fear. Bathory's childhood unfolded amid tapestries and courtly dances, yet she recoiled from polite company. As a young girl, she astonished guests by dissecting frogs in her garden, inspecting bones and sinew with the cool detachment of a surgeon. The court physician, summoned to chide her loose morals, found instead a child fascinated by life's fragile vessel. When her governess threatened punishment for such unseemly studies, Elizabeth simply smiled, as if daring anyone to deny the promise seething within her veins. Marriage did little to quell her inclinations. At 16, she wed for rank Nadasti, a soldier lauded for conquests, both on the battlefield and in the boudoir. He brought her horses and hounds, trophies from campaigns against the Turks. Yet it was the sight of blood that made her pulse quicken. Yet it was the sight of blood that made her pulse. With her husband away at war, she ruled her domains with a vengeful grace. Peasants who failed to deliver tithes found themselves lashed in the dungeons. Servants who displeased her vanished like mist, their screams swallowed by the cold stones of Cactus Castle. Rumors drifted back to Vienna, tales of a countess who bathed in streams of scarlet, convinced that the life essence of virgins would carve years from her aging flesh. No one spoke openly of her crimes. Fearful whispers died on trembling tongues. The victims, always young local girls sold or kidnapped, disappeared into secret corridors beneath the keep. There, Elizabeth and a circle of accomplices, loyal servants paid in gold and secrecy, would bind their prey. The girls lay on rough-hewn tables, limbs spread as though for a painter's study. Elizabeth, pale and composed, would lean close and murmur promises, sweet words of safety that curled into lies as soon as a sapphire-studded blade glinted in her hand. One servant recalled the thrill in her eyes as the first cut opened like a flower petal, bright blood pooling at her feet. Each drop fell into bowls, held by trembling henchmen, then carried aloft to her private chambers, where she submerged herself in the warm fluid, convinced she could slough off every wrinkle, every creeping line of age, every creeping line of age. Her cruelty was precise. She carved symbols into flesh as though branding cattle, circles and spirals that mirrored the designs in her family's heraldry. She experimented with temperature, switching between scalding oil and freezing water to prolong suffering. She tested poisons, watching pupils dilate and fade before murmured incantations. And when life finally drained from a girl's eyes, Elizabeth would study the stillness as if evaluating a masterpiece, her lips curving into a satisfied smile. The chamber echoes, gurgles, gasps, the final thud of a collapsing heart, were an area she alone could truly appreciate. Outside the castle, life carried on in innocent ignorance. Peasant children played in sunlit fields, their laughter drifting like butterflies beyond the castle's walls. But in the halls of cactus, candles guttered in thick pools of wax, and the air became heavy with the perfume of fear. Servants learned to sleep with knives under their pillows. Soldiers posted outside the gates fortified their helmets with spikes. Yet still, no knight dared breach the countess's threshold. She was a noble woman, kin to kings, and justice moved too slowly in lands ruled by lineage. At court, Elizabeth's reputation remained untarnished. She hosted lavish balls, her red gowns glinting under torchlight, her laughter like bells strung on wires. Foreign dignitaries toasted her wit, poets lauded her grace. Few suspected that behind the tapestry of civility, subterranean screams echoed through hidden passages long after the guests had departed. Even her husband, commanding armies beyond the Danube, remained oblivious to the dark rites unfolding in his own home, until rumors reached his ears, carried on the frightened lips of fleeing servant. It was a broken maid who finally shattered the silence. Fleeing through a secret exit, one rain-soaked night, she slipped into a village and collapsed at the door of a weaver, her nightdress stained with gore. She babbled of bound girls and a lady's blade, and of a woman who bathed in blood to stay forever young. The weaver's husband, a stern man with a farmer's resolve, alerted the local magistrate, who in turn dispatched a detachment to Cactus. They found the hidden stairway beneath the great hall, its steps slippery with congealed blood. Torches lit up grotesque scenes. Dried corpses hung like macabre tapestries, bones stacked like ivory bricks, and pools of rancid liquid reflecting the flicker of flame. When they confronted Elizabeth, she sat calmly at a table, set for dinner, crimson wine in her goblet, servants trembling behind her. She raised a brow, as though mildly annoyed by the intrusion. Her voice, still soft, asked whether they had brought more chairs. She was escorted to a padded cell in nearby Bratislava, still adorned in finery that mocked her newfound captivity. Her accomplices were hanged or imprisoned, their tears baptizing the gallows, while Elizabeth's trial was a perfunctory affair, an acknowledgment that even nobility could not defy all laws indefinitely. Yet the Countess refused to confess. She claimed innocence, accused the priests of witchcraft, and demanded a trial by combat. When denied, she slipped into silence, her golden hair matted, her hands scarred from frenzied attempts to cleanse them. For the last 4 years of her life, she remained locked in her tower room, the key turned only for food and water. Guards said they heard her whispering to unseen companions, chanting in a language older than Christendom, as though summoning shadows to her side. In August of 1614, Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess, as villagers now whispered, fell into a fever and never rose again. Her last moments were recorded by a monk who knelt outside her door, describing pale lips moving in prayer, or perhaps in apology. When she died, her body was wrapped in a winding sheet, but none dared wash her skin. Superstition claimed her touch could steal colors from fabric. She was interred without ceremony beneath the keep's ruins, her tomb unmarked, her legacy etched instead in the nightmares of those who dared speak her name. To this day, travelers who wander the castle of Cactus at dusk report spectral lights flickering in its empty windows, and the distant drip, drip, drip of water echoing like a heartbeat. Some swear they feel cold hands trace their necks, hear a woman's laughter, soft as silk yet edged with madness. The locals light candles on nearby stone crosses, whispering prayers for the souls lost within those walls, and for the one who believed blood could grant her eternity. As the rain resumes its steady cadence outside your window, let the weight of that tale settle around you like a velvet cloak. Feel the chill of centuries-old blood on your skin, and remember that even in graceful halls of power, cruelty can flourish in silence. And if your dreams grow restless tonight, know that one more story waits in the shadows, a final testament to human cruelty that will chase you through the hours until dawn breaks. And so, as the echoes of history fade into the hush of your room, allow me to guide you into the desert night of southern New Mexico, where beneath a starless sky and behind the walls of a corrugated metal trailer, Ah, David Parker Ray called himself a healer, a counselor of women in distress, a gentle gardener who cared for his daughter's empty swing set by day. But when the sun dipped behind the Oregon mountains, he transformed that innocuous trailer into a chamber of horrors so meticulously designed that it became known simply as the toy box, a cathedral of cruelty from which many never returned whole. Born in February of 1939 in Belen, New Mexico, David's childhood was marked by the same quiet desperation he would later inflict on others. He often spoke of a mother he barely knew, a father who disappeared before his second birthday, and a string of foster homes where affection was rationed like currency. He learned early that control was everything, controlling his temper, controlling his companions' voices, and ultimately controlling the fates of the women he would later ensnare. By his 20s, he had married twice, fathered 3 children, and carved out the persona of a devoted family man. His neighbors saw him mowing lawns in pressed slacks, watering begonias with a soft whistle on April mornings. But the meek veneer hid a mind that studied suffering as an art form. In 1996, Ray and his girlfriend at the time, Cindy Hendy, towed that nondescript metal trailer into the remote desert brush south of the Rio Grande. They outfitted it with soundproof walls lined in dark foam, electric cables rigged to switches, ropes dangling from rafters, and an array of instruments that resembled torture devices only the most depraved could imagine. There were cattle prods wired to deliver jolts of searing pain, surgical scalpels sharpened to a whisper's edge, leather straps designed to immobilize, and a pulley system that hoisted victims off the ground until their knees screamed from the strain. At the center of it all sat a wooden table stained with rust-red rings, its surface scarred by the countless surgical experiments Ray conducted in the name of his self-styled therapy. He recruited accomplices, friendships sealed with bribes of cash and twisted loyalty. Cindy Hendy served as lookout, offering rides to unsuspecting women she met in local bars or on lonely stretches of highway, her smile a prelude to betrayal. Her sister, Cindy Parker, answered the trailer's telephone, sometimes assuring callers that, "We'll fix you right up," her voice as steady as the surgeon who stitched flesh. A third accomplice, Glenda Jesse Jean, helped tidy the instruments and sometimes bound the victim's limbs as if preparing livestock for slaughter. Each woman was paid to help, to watch, to lie, until the weight of their complicity became another layer of the toy box hidden walls. Over 6 years, Ray kidnapped at least 50 women, though he confessed that the true number might be far higher. His method was always the same: a late-night invitation for a ride, a quick detour down a dusty lane, the sudden hush of the trailer doors closing behind the victim. Inside, he would blindfold her, securing thick fabric over her eyes until the world dissolved into dark. He would then pose the same question in a voice as calm as a love letter. "Do you want to talk about why you're here?" And when the trembling answer came, pleas for mercy, promises of obedience, he would respond by dragging out the cattle prod, inviting her to feel the healing power of electricity coursing through her veins. He recorded each session in horrifying detail. Video cameras mounted in corners captured every snap of leather against skin, every gasp of air squeezed from his prey's lungs, and every bead of sweat that traced a path down their temples. He spoke softly to them, coaxing confessions of guilt for sins they never committed, convinced that through confession came salvation, and in his mind, the more degraded the admission, the closer to redemption. Both of them. For Ray, torture was an act of purification, a sacrament administered in the sterile gloom of his metal chapel. But this was no impulsive spree. Ray perfected his craft by studying anatomy texts and electric circuitry, by testing the pain thresholds of small animals in laboratory cages. He timed his attacks to avoid law enforcement patrols, learned the precise range of cell phone towers to stay off the grid, and switched vehicles at hidden rendezvous points to evade highway cameras. His home was a fortress of digital encryption. He deleted logs, scrubbed surfaces for fingerprints, and even forged documents to make his victims appear complicit in imaginary crime. He believed himself invincible, shielded by the remoteness of the desert and by the complacency of a town that saw him as a harmless eccentric. His arrogance begot a final mistake. In March of 2002, he lured a young woman into a rented motel room instead of the trailer, convinced that the change of scenery would throw investigators off his trail. Inside, he tortured her for hours, recording every moment. But when he left to retrieve a larger jug of water, she managed to free one hand and dialed 911 from the bedside phone. Her screams echoed in the hallway until police broke down the door, finding Ray standing over her as calm as before, a pair of blood-stained pliers in his hand. The video equipment still whirred, capturing everything. Still whirred, capturing everything. Investigators descended on his trailer, and the horror they discovered defied comprehension. The floor was littered with scraps of fabric and shards of bone. Buckets of dark, congealed liquid sat in corners. The walls were spattered with streaks of bright red, patterns of pain that looked almost artistic in their symmetry. Bundles of rope lay coiled like serpents, waiting to strike. Ray stood at the threshold, his white shirt pristine, as though he had just arrived to inspect a job well done. In interviews, he described his motivations with chilling detachment. He spoke of helping women face their inner demons, of giving them a second chance at life. He rationalized every broken bone, every seared nerve ending as a necessary step on a path to psychological rebirth. Psychologists later diagnosed him as a sadist with narcissistic personality disorder, incapable of empathy and obsessed with omnipotence. He believed his victims would one day thank him for the clarity his methods bestowed, an assertion so grotesque that jurors recoiled in horror. At trial, jurors watched the videotapes in specially shielded rooms, their stomachs turning as they heard Ray's soft voice narrating the suffering he inflicted. Survivors testified about the blackness that swallowed them when hoods were placed over their heads, about the electric song that lanced through their arms, about the way time stretched until they could no longer distinguish seconds from eternity. One woman described feeling her mind fragment, as though her identity had been shaved away one knot at a time, leaving behind a hollow shell that trembled with gratitude when Ray at last untied her wrists. When the verdict came, 152 years in prison for kidnapping, torture, and sexual assault, Ray's expression was one of mild disappointment, as though he had expected at least a life sentence. His accomplices received lesser terms, but their reputations were ruined, their names forever linked to the metal coffin that held so many silenced voices. Yet, even behind bars, Ray refused to relinquish control. Guards found him wiring his cell window with a makeshift device that emitted high-frequency pulses, hoping to silence the loudest inmate. He wrote letters to old acquaintances, offering counseling services and seeking partnerships for future rehabilitative retreat. He never expressed remorse, only a quiet lament that his methods had been misinterpreted, that the world had failed to see the healing potential in pain. Now, the toy box stands abandoned beneath the desert sun, its trailer shell crumpled like a tin can, left too long in the wind. Local teenagers dare each other to enter its hollow frame, where they whisper of phantom screams that still reverberate through the metal rib. Visitors claim they feel a prickling hush, as if unseen hands brush against their skin, urging them toward the darkness that David Parker Ray once worshipped. As you lie beneath your own roof tonight, listen for the far-off hum of cicadas and the soft rustle of the wind. Imagine chambers where light is a memory and the tick of a clock measures only suffering, and know that in the deepest recesses of human cruelty, monsters like Ray engineered their private hells so precisely that they became invisible to those who believed they were safe. Now the storm clouds break and rain drifts, soft as muffled sobs across your window. Let this final story of control and torment fade as you drift into sleep, haunted by the knowledge that some nightmares are built with the blueprints of a single mind, and that in the silence of our own vulnerability, we may be the next to open the door.